Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan.
I'm Anna.
And you are listening to episode 58 of the Gospel Tech Podcast. Yay! Thank you guys for being here. Today, we are excited for this conversation because we're going to be talking about...
We're going to talk about when maybe you feel like you're competing for your spouse's attention and the competition is their phone.
Oof.
This is tricky.
It's all hypothetical, of course.
It's very hypothetical. We've never really even dealt with this, but we've heard that some people do. I think it's hard because we're very attached to our little screens, and people are generally a little more needy than my phone is. So we're going to talk today kind of about what happened in our house a couple weeks ago about this situation and how we navigated the tension of choosing the autonomy of our phones versus the interconnectedness of simply being present with one another.
Really, it's about a time when I had to come in and be like, Anna, it's just too much. You need to stop. I think that's... So anyway, we'll leave it at that. We're really excited to have you guys here today. And with no further ado, let's get this conversation started. Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who are feeling outpaced and overwhelmed as they raise children in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again. Excited to get this conversation started, but before we do, I wanted to just give a couple updates. First, to celebrate, you may have noticed if you follow us on social media at Love God Use Tech on either Instagram or Facebook, that we have been growing rapidly. We've grown like 25% in the last 6 weeks, which is awesome. So thank you so much for telling your friends about us, for sharing and commenting and liking. When you do that online, the algorithm basically picks up that we are not a bot and starts to pass this along to other people who might be interested in our content. So thank you for sharing with friends, for telling people about it. And we're noticing similar gains in our podcast listening. So as we continue, please do like and share and subscribe. Those are the three things you can do. Oh, and also rate, review. Those are also big for the podcast
Or if
side.
you save a post, that's a big.
That is
if
a
you
big.
save or you share a post on Instagram or Facebook, the algorithm really likes that.
We are all trying to serve our algorithm overlords right now. But really what that means is that's opportunities for other people to hear us, because while our voice is out there and the gospel and how we can connect it to technology is out there now, people basically don't hear it if the algorithm doesn't tell them about it. So thank you for your help with that. So then today's conversation is all going to be about really how do we talk about tech in our families, right?
Yes. I think this can be a really sensitive subject. And I think even not between us as a married couple, but I think can be a lot of tension anytime we maybe feel irritated by somebody else's tech use or feel like somebody's on their phone a lot and we would like them to not be on their phone. It can be a hard thing to bring up in a way that is loving, and it's a hard thing to hear from somebody that you care about. Yeah. So I think both sides of the conversation are hard to handle. So we're going to talk about how can we have these conversations, because they probably need to happen, or they are happening and maybe they're not going well,
right?
Or they just maybe need to happen. And we want to give you some tools for how to do that.
Yeah, and we mentioned jokingly earlier, but this is like from a very tangible, like pretty raw recent event in our own lives. So we wanted to, rather than kind of talk hypothetically, like, well, this is what one could do. Like we've seen this in our lives, and it's not just like, well, this is bad tech. It's really like we're sinful people, and we will continue to find ways to misuse things. So how can we lovingly intercede, not just to try to fix the problems in the people around us, but really to expose areas of our lives where we are getting distracted or we are getting consumed, and not with the goodness of God, but by these other things that are peripheral, and they're fine in their tertiary position in life. But when they start to bump up and kind of sit on the throne of our hearts, what can we do to lovingly bring that to light without accusing, without shaming, without doing anything that kind of puts us in a hierarchical better position, but by saying, hey, like, I love you, and this is what we want to talk about. There's a plug for this. If you need to talk about how to talk.
Yes, we are not marriage experts. We are married.
We have that.
We're reasonably happy in our marriage.
Oh, man. Like out of 10, are you like a 6?
I feel like today's a good day.
Oh,
Today
7.
is a 7, maybe.
Wow.
I mean, I'm no Justin Pavey. I'm not a 9 out of 10. But I don't know that I'm probably ever a 9 out of 10 on most things. But anyway, for
I'm always like
some
an 11,
expert advice on just how to talk about talking, if that is maybe something that's communication is something that is hard in your relationship. Our friends at Fierce Marriage, Ryan and Selena, just had a podcast, episode 202, on talking about talking.
Yeah.
So if you are wanting more of a deep dive just on that piece of it, I'd check them out. They're the experts in that field.
There. So just an idea. If you listen to this, you're like, man, like that was fine information, but how do I actually begin this conversation? Episode 202, Fierce Marriage. Cool. So let's talk then. Let's start off with why it's important to be able to talk about tech well. Why don't you start us off on this?
Okay. Well, we're just kind of looking at the husband and wife relationship today. So maybe we'll have a different conversation later about how to talk to a child about their tech use and how to have that conversation not blow up on you.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference. So today we're just focusing on husband-wife. So I think our first place to start is that to remember we're a team. Our family unit is a team. As a husband and a wife, we're a team. We want to run our race well, and we want to point each other to Jesus. That, I think, is part of our job as brothers and sisters in Christ, is to be pointing each other to Jesus. If somebody on our team is struggling, we want to be the encourager, the supporter. We want to build them up. So we have a couple just spots in the Bible we want to build this off of.
Yeah, I think the first one, we were praying through this, and I think the first one is 2 are better than 1 because they have, so this is coming out of Ecclesiastes 4:9-10. So we have this idea that 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. And then it goes on to say in the next verse that a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken, right? We hear this a lot at weddings. And that third strand being God in this relationship, in our hearts, bringing us together, that we have now become one, and that God now binds us together so that when we make mistakes, we have this loving person, not to point out our flaws and to constantly like make us aware that we're not enough, but to remind us that because we're not enough, we know the one who is. And that's the beauty of being married. And the reason this is such an important conversation in tech is, man, we're painfully aware of the failings of our spouse. So now how can we humbly and lovingly bring up these issues to the other person in love, not in gotcha, which is actually the second verse we have.
Yeah, the second verse is from Galatians 6. Brothers, if anyone is caught up in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. I love that spirit of gentleness, of
it's so good.
not calling out somebody's sin or maybe misuse of tech even. Maybe it's not even like a flagrant sin. Like when we're going to talk about our situation today, it's not like it wasn't this scandal. It was the best of tech, just maybe being a little bit misused. And so to come and approach it from a place of gentleness, because I think we've all seen and maybe had conversations where we've tried to call out tech. And I know a lot of times my default is I'm just going to be sarcastic about it, or I'm going to be a little passive and hope that you get the hint. And a lot of that doesn't usually land well. Like,
no, it comes off the like the Chris Farley, like, you're going to eat that fry? I thought you were on a diet. Lay off me, I'm starving.
Right. Like, you have a problem with tech. I don't have a problem. I do great. And it gets really escalated really quickly, whereas the other times when maybe I've like, okay, I'm just going to be really calm and I'm going to be really direct of, we don't use phones at the table. Would you mind putting yours away? And the person typically responds very calmly and it's over and it's done and it's dealt with, instead of it being like this, oh, now we're mad because of the delivery.
Right. And I think that I love 2 parts of that, because this applies well outside of our tech, but we do it in gentleness. And then the next is keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. as soon as we say, well, I have the right to correct this person because I would never do that, right? I would never misuse my tech that way. I would never make this mistake. That is not true. That person is a human who's loved by God and who, if they pursue Christ, if they have repented and believe, they have the Holy Spirit and they are making maybe an error of either ignorance or intentionality and need to be brought back in accountability. And we do that humbly because we are susceptible to the exact same and worse. So in tech, it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And then the last one, let the word of Christ richly dwell within you as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God, Colossians 3:6. And I just love this idea that we're not doing this based on our own wisdom. We're not even doing this based on research. Like, we love God and we love our family and we love them preemptively. We love them actively. And when we see something that doesn't line up with who God is calling them to do or what God's calling them to do, have, or be, then we step in and we make this in line with our worship, with our Bible reading, right? Like, all of that lines up. And now we connect our tech to it. So we let the word of God richly dwell within us. And then out of that, we admonish one another humbly, gently towards Christ. All that. So those are our 3 verses.
Yes. And I think those are speaking more on the behalf of the person who is doing the calling out. And then I think for the person who is being called out, it's also... I think when your reaction to being called out is a good indicator of what's happening in your heart.
Oh,
whether or not
might
you
want to
want it
repeat
to
that.
be.
Yeah, that was good.
Your reaction to being called out is typically an indicator of what's happening in your heart. Yeah. So if I get called out on I'm texting too much and Ethan says something to me and I lose it, then that might be a little red flag that I'm really wrapped up in that, or that has taken a spot maybe in my life that it's too high of a priority.
Yeah. Or even it's a red flag of something going on. Like you might be having stress in your life or other relational issues where this has now become this unhealthy outlet. And so there are some of you right now that are building a list for other people. I can hear it happening, right? Like you're starting to run through the check like, oh, they totally do this at dinner time, late at night, when we should be right? Like, I understand that. Remember, this would also, this isn't one of the verses for today, but that idea of like, we need to prayerfully ask God to show us where are we misusing our tech, right? We need to get that plank out of our own eye so that we can humbly go and say, hey, listen, like, I know I'm not perfect. And then we have the words to say, right? Like, I love you. And this seems to be a problem. So yeah, we do need to evaluate that. There will be this defensive-ness sometimes, and we need to recognize that and look at where that's pointing us to, because it's not just that thing. If we're hyper defensive, it often is a root issue. So do you want to run us through the scenario of what we've kind of teased this out? Sorry, guys. But there was this event that occurred in our life. You want to run through it for us? Kind of tell the story?
Sure. I'll tell. It sounds
and
like...
I'll correct it as it goes. Don't worry.
It sounds like it was this huge deal. It wasn't. I feel like...
It at the time felt like a huge deal.
It did, but I don't feel like it was this giant fight we had. It was just like this ongoing conversation while we kind of figured out
maybe I need to tell the story from my point of view. You want me to tell it first and then you can give context? Because my part, all right, so basically, as you guys
maybe because I wasn't the one in the error, so I didn't feel that big of a deal.
Maybe. So if you guys have not heard before, I have since the last couple of years kind of got into cycling, outdoor bike riding. And since COVID began indoor training. And this has been something I've kind of grown more and more in love with. It's fun for me. It's an old man sport, right? It's not going to break my hip. I can't play football and I can't like full contact wrestle because life. So I've gotten into it. I found a podcast that I really enjoy. I found a training app, and I've just kind of started like the big deep dive of nerding out on cycling. How can I get faster? How can I get better? And so one particular night, we kind of flip a coin, who's going to go take care of dishes and who's going to give the kids the evening bath. And our kids get like amped up crazy when they take their evening baths. So I ended up, and I had actually picked give the kids a bath this particular night.
I did.
And I was down doing dishes. And so I turned my podcast on, right? And I didn't put AirPods in. Like I just had my phone out on the counter and I hit play. And so I'm doing dishes, which if anyone knows me, I'm not the world's...
So slow.
I'm very intentional, but like this is very chill time for me. Like I'm doing dishes.
He's
I'm
not in a
completely
hurry.
zoned out. I'm not in a hurry. This is not a competition. They'll end up very clean, but like I'm not breaking any records. And I just know that like when I was a kid, my family thought I was doing this on purpose. It's just how I do dishes. Yeah, I know, right?
Painful.
It's painful, especially for an organized, focused person like Anna. So I'm in the middle of this, just kind of zoned out state of doing dishes. And literally Anna comes downstairs, looks into the kitchen, just says, "You love your podcast more than you love me." And then like leaves. And I was like, whoa, what? Like, what just happened? And so in my heart, right, like I felt attacked.
It was a drive-by.
I was like legitimately mad because first of all, like that's a sensitive area for me. Like I really want to love Anna well, and I know that I often just like belly flop on this. I just don't. I get overwhelmed by my desire to want to do well, and then I do nothing is basically what happens. So for me to be in the middle of that, get that drive-by information, which was a sensitive subject anyway, and now I'm like my podcast and app, my training for cycling is now like the center of that was an issue, and there were so many things to be said and no time to say them, and so when Anna was like, it was fine. Like it was a thing. Like there was a lot of sweating and frustration and like feeling like we were coming from two totally different worlds to try to do this. So what we're trying to say is just emulate us when you have this conversation because we did great.
And then I just kept joking about it for a few days, which
always the good mature thing to do.
always very helpful. But I think like I said it in the heat of the moment, and then it took me a few days to figure out what did I mean? Because he's like, I don't actually love my podcast more than I love you. And I know that deep down, I know you love me. But I think it's been a running conversation. And even if like it's in a joking way, I feel like I'll be like, are you planning dates for me? Are you planning are you writing down some notes? Because we're going to go on a trip and you're going to surprise me. Like, I just always want him in his free time to be thinking about me.
Yeah.
Which isn't reasonable, but that's what is happening in my head.
Sure. Wait,
So,
in your head, you're planning dates for me?
no, in my head, in your free time, you're planning dates and
Nathan
surprises.
left the room. He's probably
like,
planning
what's
something.
on that notepad? Oh, he's making a list of the things he loves about me.
Yeah, definitely not like nerding out about some side project for sure.
Yeah. So then it had the honest part of the statement really was that in a lot of your free time, the podcast had been coming on. You'd been listening to it. And the thing that you have been the most excited about probably since COVID, once you started working out again in COVID.
Yeah, there was a season, folks.
mean, the early COVID was rough, you guys, but once you got back in it, then cycling really has been the thing you're most excited about. And I think I started to feel like you're not excited about me. You're just excited about cycling. And the podcast was like a manifestation of that, like a very tangible, like thing. But the other thing that I think we finally realized was this other issue that I think is really common in families and between couples is this idea of like when we do have that down space or it feels like, oh, we're just in the house doing nothing and we're doing separate chores. And that's really what we were doing. Like Nathan was doing the dishes and I was on bath duty and we were in different parts of the house. And it's not like we were having a hangout time or having ongoing conversation. But when one person turns on their tech in whatever form, now that space is their own, right? So now when I come downstairs to say, hey, or to say, oh, this kid just did this, like, can you believe it? I'm interrupting whatever thing that he's turned on, or vice versa. Like it could be, I am not innocent of, like, I do the same thing. So I think it was just like this little red flag of like, oh, we need to protect this little downtime in our house, because if we don't, and every little nook and cranny gets filled with somebody's personal entertainment, essentially, then you lose some of those opportunities for connection. And I think that's what we kind of rooted out from the joking and
and then the conversations that came. And I really want to flag this. Definitely for husbands, I think, speaking as a husband, I will just speak for our side of this. Men, like, we need to prayerfully address spots in our hearts where we are, like, even just hearing Anna say it again, I was like, oh man, that's brutal. And it's not something I can change. She said, right, he's more excited about cycling than about me, or like he's most excited. And even if that's not true, right? Even if in my heart and mind, I'm like, no, like I definitely would, like if I had to pick between cycling and my wife and kids, like my wife and kids every time. And yet, like, that's not being communicated. And that's not something I can just go flip a switch and go, well, I'll just display this better. Like, I actually don't exactly know what that means, right? I need to pray about that. I'm like, Lord, where am I? Like, am I unintentionally like giving my heart and giving my mind and focusing my energy so much that it's communicating to my family, like, this is my number one, right? Like, and everything else falls in. For you, that may not be cycling, but there might be something. And that's, in this case, it came up from a kind of blow up argument that was building pressure. But we do need to be intentional about prayerfully pursuing our families, and not just with date nights, but with our attention and with our focus, and not letting, in this case, technology of whatever our passion. This might be your work computer, right? This might be whatever entertainment you enjoy most. But if it's starting to consume not just your time, but your focus, your love, that we need to be intentional about that. So that's just my challenge to husbands, is let's pray about that. If you're listening to this with your wife and she just stared at you, we'll get to what you guys can do next.
I think everybody is equally, like,
sure,
this can be anybody in the house, and everybody has their temptation. And I think the other thing that is at play here is that people can't compete with the excitement and the dopamine hit that's happening on your phone. And I think we talk about this a lot, but just the pace of real life and the pace of nighttime chores and that wind down time in the house is not as rewarding in your brain as checking a text or checking whatever thing on your phone that you like to check. But we have to retrain our brains to have your spouse be the most exciting thing that's happening, right? Like, even if, okay, we're just hanging out and we're doing nothing, or we're going to just talk about whatever is going on, like, and to show that to your kids, like, that you matter and my attention is here. And even if we're doing nothing, like, doing nothing with you is still doing something. And I don't have to be checking my phone every 10 minutes because I need a quick hit to see what else is going on out there.
Show them the intentionality of being present, right? Like, that's one of the things you mentioned to me later was twofold. One, like, you're not present. You're not part of this, just what you mentioned. And when I go, why am I doing that? Like, why do I feel like I need this podcast? It is because, like, that's so easy. Like, relationships are hard.
I want to be entertained. Like, I want to be constantly
and
entertained.
For me, and this is just full disclosure, everyone, cycling is a control thing. Like, I can control my cycling. I can control my body. I can control my effort. Like, it's something I can go and get an easy win. And it's not necessarily an easy, like, dopamine hit. It's not like gaming was, but I can control that. Like, I can put out the right number of watts for the right amount of time and, like, feel like I did something, right? And it's hard to do that with kids. Like, I don't know, where's my gold star for today with raising kids? Like, that's hard, but it's so important, and we're called to that. And I love, you had said a line earlier, and I believe you even wrote it in an article about this, but that will be forthcoming, everyone. Tease. But you'd mentioned just kind of like the idea of why that my inattention bothered you.
Yeah, I finally just was able to articulate, like, in this space of household monotony and kind of the drudgery of that can feel like doing all the things that have to happen at the end of the day, I didn't feel seen. Like, we were in separate spaces, even if we were physically in the same spot. Like, you're enjoying a podcast and I'm over here, and now I'm just doing this by myself. Like, I might as well be home alone putting the kids to bed, which is fine, but it's a lot more fun when your best friend is there to hang out with, and you can, even in just doing the chores, like, that is an opportunity to connect and to be together and to enjoy doing something monotonous together.
Yeah. And so then we have all right, like, what do we do about this? Because I think most of us would agree, like, we have been around people who have been distracted, even if it's only 10 seconds out of every 3 minutes because their phone buzzes and tap, or their wristwatch taps them, or their Google glasses, or whatever their thing is.
Is that really? Are those a thing?
Oh, that's a thing.
They're
They just
coming
came out
back.
with the new version. Yeah, and the Amazon ones. Wearables are going to be here, folks. So we need to figure out, what does it look like to love people in this world just saturated with tech, and to do so lovingly. And when we recognize we're out of space, or someone else or out of place, excuse me, or someone around us is out of place, what do? That's where we come in humility. We've prayerfully prepared ourselves. And if there's a blow up, we recognize that the blow, it's not, Nathan, stop listening to your podcast. It's, Nathan, start investing your energy into me and into our family. Like, that's it. And so I think just reiterating, like, there's nothing morally wrong with my cycling podcast.
Right.
This is not one of those situations where I was, doing anything untoward or, against the Bible. But
No, that I feel like that's the best that tech has to offer, is the cycling podcast that gives you mental and physical health, and it's a positive outlet for you. But anything can become an idol or take a.
it can get misprioritized.
Yes,
And in
yes,
this
that was
case,
the word.
I needed someone who loved me to say it, because most people look and go, well, it could be worse. And they'll just blow right
Sure.
past it. But that's not what we're doing. Like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so we want to be intentional with that. Don't poo-poo those things where you're like, but this bothers me. Even if you end up with the conversation going, okay, we are fine with this. Like, I didn't stop cycling, people. Like, I still listen to the podcast. I pick when and where. I don't do it while doing the dishes, right? I don't do it in just every spare moment. I'm not checking Strava and the training app, and like, I'm not doing all that around the family. Like, I set a time now, and if I don't make that time, I just check it the next day. Like, I'm learning to put some boundaries around it, and so it doesn't mean you will just cut it off, walk away. It may mean you adapt some stuff, which leaves us to, how do we navigate this conversation?
Yeah, we want to give you a couple steps to navigate these conversations, and I think we could go a lot deeper, but we're just gonna breeze the surface here of 3 things to help you navigate these conversations to maybe avoid a blow up. So the first one, and we've talked about this a little bit, is just, if you're the person who's doing the calling out of the misuse of tech, or you're the person being called out, to come to either spot in a place of humility. I remember Jesus saying something very specific about removing the plank from your own eye before the speck from your brother's. Is just kind of a good reminder, I think, for all of us. And you said that earlier, of just, we'd like to think that, oh, I would never misuse my tech. I would never check it at the dinner table. I use my Apple Watch only appropriately and never when somebody is talking to me. And maybe you do. Maybe you're perfect. But chances are there's an area that you would be or could be potentially misusing it. So on either end of that spectrum, to just come to it from a place of humility, and also to just let us remember that the person we're trying to nudge away from his or her phone is not just our spouse, but is our brother or sister in Christ. And that we want the best for that person, and that they want the best for us too, that they're not just trying to be mean and to nitpick, that they're really trying to make me look more like Jesus.
Yeah. And I love that idea of, like, yes, we're taking the plank out of our eye, like with prayer, by the way. That's not a willpower thing. Like, we're praying, we're asking God, would you expose in my life, like, these areas of sin that are just kind of hiding and lurking? When God exposes them, we repent of those, we remove and replace if we need to. And then we lovingly pray about, okay, like, what other areas in our family do we need to adjust? And sometimes it might be, hey, this bothers you about this individual, but it's not actually the tech, it's this other thing. Sometimes it's going to be the tech. And pray for the words to do that. Like, Anna's communication ended up being, the problem isn't even the app. The problem is I don't feel seen, right? The problem is I feel just kind of lost and alone in this house with these kids in the monotony and Groundhog's Day that is COVID for a full year plus now. How can I, like, feel loved? And I think that was where the conversation really went. So it does take humility to receive it. That also is a way we can build wisdom, is receiving these kind of admonitions. And then it takes humility to be able to give that well. So yeah, I love that. That was really well put.
Thanks. Number 2 is, we've talked a lot about this, but establishing norms of tech use can help diffuse some of these conversations. So I think this didn't blow up like it could have, because we do have kind of some just baseline standards for tech use in our house for when we use tech and what that is going to look like. But having those conversations ahead of time can help prevent this from just feeling like it's coming from left field.
Yeah, and this is going to sound like a plug. This is not intended to be a plug. This is why we made this resource, the Family Tech Framework. If you do not have one, there are some just on the interwebs you can find. The reason we're not pointing you to them is because we didn't like them. And so we made one we do like. You can literally go gospeltechworkshop.com. And what you'll find there is a PDF of an actual workbook to walk through with your family. And it's really 2 parts. The first part is, how do you have a tech conversation? So you'll establish common language like tool and drool tech, and how do we know if our tech is healthy with a reset, and what can we do if it's not? And the second part is you actually build this framework, talking through what are our ground rules. Like, you'll actually establish like, well, because we believe the gospel, right? Because we believe the good news that God saves sinners and that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, then in light of that, how do we treat people on social media? What kind of games do we play, right? Like basic ground rules, timelines, expectations, so that you can now fight for your family, not just with them when it comes to technology. And that's a big deal. So you need a tech framework. And if you don't have one, these conversations get very convoluted because there's a bunch of underlying expectations and assumptions that make people flare up, right? I was assumed that this podcast was fine because I was doing dishes, and I would not have guessed that Anna was feeling alone when she wanted to come down and make a glib remark about what our kids were doing, right? Which is what had happened, and I didn't pay attention because I was off in my dishes zone, right? And so just having that tech framework is going to be a really important part. So if the first thing you can do is remember to be humble and prayerful, the second thing is you need a tech framework. You need to establish these norms. Either use the one we've made or use another one that you like and have, but you have to have some kind of expectation for tech. If you go in with 0 expectations, you're just asking everyone to kind of do what feels natural. And that's almost never a good decision when raising a family.
Yeah, or even just between the two of you. Like, it's nice to have some standards set.
Yeah.
For this is what we feel okay with and what lines up with our
Talking
biblical...
as a parenting couple.
Yeah.
Yes.
And just between the two of you of like, we feel good about this show. We feel good about where we're going to use tech and when we'll use our individual tech. And then when somebody does go off the rails, you have somewhere to go back to kind of realign. And I think that is a very helpful spot to be.
Yeah. And I'm going to take a side. This isn't in the notes, but we get it a lot. I get a lot of couples coming and asking if we do talk to couples about gaming. And the answer is always no. And I'm just going to say, statistically right now with the group we're having come to us, that people are generally wives asking about husbands. I'm not going to say that that's true for everyone, but I will just say this. If gaming is one of those issues that you guys need to talk about, having this expectations as a couple just amongst husband and wife, where wives can feel unloved because of a husband's passion and interest in their games, and husbands feel like, well, this is something I enjoy. There's nothing morally wrong with what I'm doing, and this helps me. You need to get on the same page there, not knocking down some kind of, intellectual tech MMA fight where one of you is going to win, but you both need to be heard. And the most important thing in that conversation is going to be the truth of the gospel. Is it helping you further your love for one another and your passion for God and His glory? And good. Anything that gets in the way of that becomes expendable. And we need to keep the first things first. So just keep that in mind, and specifically with that gaming conversation, because it's one we get asked a lot, and the tech framework is the way to help you begin to work through it. It won't fix it, because the point isn't fixing. The point is exposing it and putting it in the light of the gospel.
Yes, that's good. And last one is to get to the root of what is the issue. What specifically, if you're the person who's kind of irritated with your spouse in
the app, podcast, show, game, whatever it is,
figure out maybe before you go to him or her, this is why this is bothering me. So you can be specific. So calm yourself down and try and, if you need to write it down or you need to talk it out with a safe friend who you can kind of bounce ideas off of.
Can I asterisk that one real quick?
Uh-huh.
Don't just go vent to your friend.
No, yes. I'm saying, like, maybe there's one friend that you're seeking wise counsel of, like, that I where you,
I know who your people are.
yes, just say like, I need to bounce. Like, am I being unreasonable? Like, maybe it's me. I want you to, so you can tell me if it's me that's being unreasonable, or is this something that is worth bringing up and having this conversation.
Yeah. Prayerful, loving friends are awesome.
Yes. Like, yes. I don't think we need to do this all in isolation.
Yep.
But then bring it up as you would any difficult conversation. So I don't know that how I brought it up was probably the model example of the drive-by.
You love your
app more than you love me. See you later. Gotta go. That probably isn't what any communication expert would recommend, but it worked in our house.
We're not Fierce Marriage, so we can give all the bad advice we want.
Check out Fierce Marriage if you need some really great communication advice. But the one little tip that I do really like that Ryan and Selena say a lot is
of Fierce Marriage.
Of Fierce Marriage.
Yeah, that's connect the dots.
Our show's not sponsored by them, but it should be today. The little trick for communication, like for hard conversations that they use a lot, is to bring it up maybe earlier in the day. Like, hey, can we talk later tonight? I have something that I want to talk to you about. To just kind of plant the seed of, I need to talk. And then it gives space, like, okay, we're going to be intentional with our time, and we're going to carve out space and carve out emotional energy to have a conversation. And that way everybody is kind of ready and geared up, instead of just like, oh, I thought we were just sitting down to watch TV. And now you're like ready to have this big, deep, meaningful conversation.
Yeah, it feels more like an ambush.
Yes. Yeah. It's helpful if everybody can kind of be on the same page ahead of time.
Yeah. And I just want to loop back to what I said about the don't go vent. And there's two reasons I said that. Because talking to a prayerful, loving friend, like someone in your community or someone you trust, even if you have to, get on an app and talk to them because they live in Hawaii or something, like the idea is there's two problems if you're just going to vent. Is one, you might get the rage out and feel like, well, that's fine, but you haven't fixed the problem. It's going to happen again in the future. And now you're going to have it happen a second time. And in your mind, this is a repeat offense.
I already dealt with this.
I already dealt with this once. And the poor individual who's doing the dishes and has no idea that this is now a mounting situation, it escalates, right? And so now your rage is now even a bigger gap between...
That's never happened in our house.
Not that it would ever happen in our home, but some people might have that issue. So that's one problem with venting is it does, like, you do kind of blow off steam and they're like, well, it wasn't that bad, I'm fine. That's not true. Let's deal with it. Let's confess it. It might be a personal issue, and you can talk that out. It's okay to have personal issues in a marriage, and it's wonderful to speak that in the grace that we have in the gospel, that we are equally sinners and redeemed. So we can talk through these issues. The second issue is it may do the opposite. You may get such a head of steam and start remembering all of these things this individual has done wrong that now you start building a court case. And now it's not just this one thing, it's the you always and you never. And that escalates too. So when you go to a friend, it's okay to talk it out and ask the, like, am I crazy? Like, help me talk through like what I'm feeling, what I'm expressing to get the correct words. But you've got to make sure you take that back and have that conversation, say, hey, I need to speak with you, right? Like, it has to lead to that. So that was my point with the
I think
don't
that's
go vent,
good.
because it can turn very quickly into gossip or other things. So
right. Yeah, it can be unhelpful.
Yeah. So that's it.
That's what it is, you guys. It was a cycling podcast that broke the camel's back.
It was it. But I guess where are we now? Like, let's give some closure on that. Like,
you planned 1 million trips to Hawaii. We've gone on so many dates. I've had flowers every day. You bought me 10 presents.
Apparently I was cheating on you with the cycling podcast. This is terrible. No, but like so personally what I did, as I mentioned previously, is I toned down when and how I go about it. I even just today went on an actual ride as part of my workout. We finally broke 50 degrees and sunny. Woo! So I still do those things, but like we had a real conversation. We realized it was actually about more than just a cycling podcast. And we recognized that there are things I can do with tech to help it, but we can also be intentional about dates, conversations, praying together, that we realized. And honestly, for me, it was doing quiet times, which I addressed in another podcast, but taking those 10 minutes to hear from the Lord and to open my heart and to be renewed in the word each and every day. So we're praying that that's the case for you guys, that this conversation has encouraged you. If it's not something you deal with, awesome. you can reach out to us. We would love to hear your life story and how that's going, because that's incredible. But if it is something you're dealing with, I hope you have at least the first step to getting it started. Anna and I love being able to have these conversations with you guys, and we're so grateful. If you have anything specific you'd like us to address or to talk through, you can reach out to me, Nathan, at gospeltech.net, or you can reach out to either of us at Love God Use Tech on Instagram and Facebook. And other than that, we are so excited to be able to have these conversations. Thank you so much for being a part of it and for sharing with your friends. And we look forward to next week's conversation as we continue to talk together about how we can love God and use tech.